Back by popular demand. Don't know how long it will last, but I'm really gonna try this time. What kind of lettuce was served on the Titanic? Iceberg. So, hope you enjoyed that. Hello everyone, welcome to my 4th installment of books I have read in 2017. I have a lot of books to talk about today because it's been a while, so let's just get right on started. The last book that we talked about in my last wrap-up was Unravel Me by Tahereh Mafi. After I read that, I ended up picking up The Art of Sleeping Alone, Why One French Woman Gave Up Having Sex, and this is by Sophie Fontanelle. And it's a memoir about her deciding to stop having involvement with men, and clearly what the title says, she stopped having sex, and it was a self-discovery journey for her. This was like a 150-page little memoir, so I decided to pick it up and see what I felt about it, and I ended up adoring this book. I bought this on a whim because I found it on Book Outlet and thought it looked pretty, and this has a 2.68 star rating on Goodreads, which I did not know until I gave it the 5 stars that I did. So that really puzzled me because I felt the writing style in this was absolutely gorgeous, even though it's translated from French. Sometimes it leaned a little too heavily on wordiness, and I don't know if that's because there is a translation issue there, but each of these chapters is 2 to 3 pages long, and it's just a little tiny snippet of her life and shows one story. And I recently got into flash fiction, and it really reminded me of that, where you get a little piece of her life, a piece of her story, a piece of her mind. She decides to give up sex with men because she felt suffocated by the men in her life, and she realized she was being subordinated and she didn't feel powerful when she was in relationships with men, so she decided to forfeit it and see how that led her. And it's such a book about transformation and autonomy and finding yourself, and I thought it was absolutely gorgeous, and I don't know why people don't like it. I don't agree with 100% of the things that she said in this book, but it did really make me think. It was so thought-provoking, and it really focused on self-love. I do think the first half of this book is stronger than the last half of it, but regardless, I think its message was very clear and very powerful, and I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. I don't know why it has a low rating. Just go read it. The next book I read was Ignite Me by Tahereh Mafi, which is a reread for me. I think it's the 4th or 3rd or 5th time that I've reread it. If you remember, whenever I was speaking about Unravel Me, I said something about rereading it that time wasn't as exciting for me, whereas it used to be my favorite book in the series. I really wasn't fangirling over it that much, so I didn't know if I'd lost that part of me that could fangirl about Shatter Me. She's still rolling. She's still here. Because reading Ignite Me, I was an emotional mess. This is definitely my new favorite in the series. It is so good. I love Warner so much. What can I say? I've reread this so many times and it just feels so real to me. Restore Me was just announced, so this isn't the final book in the series, and I am shooken. Shatter Me is my favorite series of all time. It's about a girl named Juliet who has a lethal touch. We don't care. I reread it. It was still 5 stars. It was so good. Moving on. The next book I read is something that I began last year, way last year, for Diversathon. I never finished it. Citizen by Claudia Rankine. It's called American Lyric, so it is like prose written in like poetry-esque vibes. And this talks all about the Black experience in America, how privilege affects the social systems and how Blacks are treated. Last year when I started this, I was getting bored, which is why I stopped reading it, but as soon as I picked this back up, I went from the beginning and I reread everything, and I guess I just had a fresh mind because I devoured it. Once again, I think the message of this is really important and really impactful. This is written mostly in 2nd person, so it's saying like, this happens to you, to you, to you, and it seemed at the beginning I was confused on who the audience was supposed to be, but then I realized even though I'm white and this is written from the Black experience, it puts me in those shoes for a reason, and it was so eye-opening and horrific. It's gorgeous, it's educational, there's photography interspersed between all the different stories and parts of it, so it just punches you that much more in the gut. It talks a lot about microaggressions, which I think is the most eye-opening part about it, is things that happen that you might not even realize are happening. So once again, it's just a really educational read. I highly recommend this to anyone. The only complaint I had about it is that sometimes the stylistic choices of the poems were things that I'm not a huge fan of, so a lot of the times it would get really wordy and that would mud down the message that it was trying to send. And additionally, sometimes there were pieces that didn't have any punctuation and they were just one giant paragraph, which is one of my least favorite ways of storytelling of all time. So just those pieces weren't my favorite, but all of the rest were absolutely gorgeous. Once again, highly recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. And the next book I read, I listened to on audiobook, and that was Yes Please by Amy Poehler. I'm currently watching Parks and Rec on Netflix, and I saw that the audiobook was narrated by Amy, so I went, yes please. This is a memoir that follows her life, how she got started on SNL, her ins and outs about Parks and Rec, There's pieces about her family, there's feminism, there's advice, and it's just stories about her life and things that she wants you to know. First and foremost, this was hilarious. I just love Amy Poehler and her sarcasm and her puns. One of my main favorite things about this book is that the last chapter is a recording of her reading the chapter live to an audience, and so you can hear the audience interaction and how she shifts her tone to accommodate that, and it's just so enjoyable to listen to. One other thing that I really liked was that she had guests on her audiobook, and anytime that she would introduce a new guest, there was this really candid moment where she was introducing them and it's them in the recording booth together, and it's just so funny to hear them talk so candidly, and I thought that was a great addition to the audiobook. In addition, the audiobook would play scenes from Parks and Rec, or it would play audio recordings from SNL and stuff like that. If it was referencing something, it would put you in that dialogue. Although that does pose some spoilers for Parks and Rec, which I would caution if you wanted to read this book, wait until you finish Parks. But it just made it that much more humorous, and I really liked it because of that. The first half of this book wasn't so interesting for me because I'd never watched her on SNL. I don't watch SNL in general, so although I like to hear about her story, it wasn't something I could really click with. But once I got to the last half and we got the behind the scenes of Parks and Rec and we got pieces about her family and just her life in general, I thought that that was very meaningful. Listening to this went by so quickly, it was insane, but it felt like it went by in 1 hour. It just was so much fun to listen to. Time flew. If you like Amy Poehler, I would definitely recommend picking this one up, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was a poetry book called Idiot Verse by Keaton Henson. Keaton Henson is one of my all-time favorite singers. I did a review for this one, so I'll link that review down below and just mention it briefly. I thought it was gorgeous, of course. I'm obsessed with his lyrics. I'm obsessed with his writing. It is so gorgeous. He writes about love and heartbreak and the city and his anxiety and feelings of self-hatred. And this book also has his artwork in it, so I think it's just even that much more gorgeous. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of Keaton. I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which is a really popular book. This book follows a boy named Santiago who is a shepherd, and he wants something bigger for his life, and he realizes he has this personal legend where he has to go fulfill finding treasure at the Egyptian pyramids. So he goes on this journey from Spain to Egypt, and he's going through the Sahara Desert in Africa, and he meets a lot of people on the way that assist him in his journey. And it's just really this motivational story about this boy who is trying to find himself and fulfill his life's purpose. And I think that it's a very interesting book, and it's a very quotable book. I also have a review for this book, so if you want to check out my full thoughts down below, it'll be there. But I think that this is a really valuable story just because of the message it sends. It's very upfront and literal. It's really short, it's really easy to read, and the message that it sends is so valid and so applicable to anyone who reads it, despite where you live, what class you're in, what religion you are. I think it could be relatable to anyone, and it is really inspiring, so I would recommend you pick it up. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next book I read was The One Memory of Flora Banks by Emily Barr, which I did a sponsored review of, so you can go check that out if you would like to. This book follows a girl named Flora Banks who at 10 years old had a brain surgery, and afterwards there was a complication that made it so that she couldn't make any new memories. So she always writes post-it notes and on her hands things that she has to remember throughout the day. And this book starts out where she kisses her best friend's boyfriend and she remembers it. So it's the one thing she remembers, and she has to figure out why that is, and she has to go on this journey of self-discovery. I thought it was a really interesting book. I give it 3.5 stars. Flora was an interesting main character. I've never read a book about amnesia before, but I did have a couple of issues with this book as far as believability, since she's supposed to be the 10-year-old mindset and yet she's kissing boys and traveling, and I didn't really understand it, and I felt like if the author would have stopped to explain that part of it better, then it would have been okay. But it read really weirdly because it was a lot of suspension of disbelief for me, but I did think that the writing style was cool and it had a very thriller vibe, so I really enjoyed it in the end, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And lastly, I read a book for class, but I've already read it in my own time, so it was a reread for me, and that was Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. We were supposed to read both that one and Through the Looking Glass, but I only got to read the first one because lazy. But I really enjoyed this on reread. The first time I read it, I was really skeptical about it because I thought that Alice was stupid. I felt she was so ditzy and she didn't understand the world, and it was annoying to me, and I didn't like the writing, and I was so bored reading it. But this time around I felt the opposite about all of those things. I loved Alice. She was so smart and witty. I love how she handled all the creatures she interacted with, and the way that the story is told with all the puns and the double meanings was really interesting to me. Maybe I enjoyed it more because this is an annotated edition, so there were all these little tidbits and facts in the margins, but I do recommend that edition if you didn't enjoy Alice the first time and you're looking for some more deeper meaning meaning behind it. It was super interesting. I gave it 5 stars, and I would love to read The Looking Glass one day when I'm not dying under the stress of that class. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed all the books that I have read recently. And until next time, hope you're having a wonderful life. Goodbye!